Hello everyone, and thanks for tuning in. Today we are going to work on our Tele-Games video arcade system we have here. This was recently purchased at an online estate sale for one of our Flippin' Easy videos. And after we got it, we noticed that the power switch here was broken. All the others are okay. And the system actually came with the original switch that was broken in a baggie. The problem is the part that's broken is plastic, and I'm not confident that we would be able to glue the plastic back and keep it from breaking whenever someone flips the switch on and off. This is the same as a Atari 2600 console. It's just rebranded for Sears Tele-Games. So what we're going to do in the video, we're going to disassemble this. We're going to repair the switch, and then we'll put it back together, clean it all up, and test it out to make sure it works. I've never had one of these apart before, never tried to replace the switch, but we're going to try our best to see if we can get this thing to work. We purchased the switch here from eBay for $9 plus $4 shipping and handling, and it included this little dust cover that goes over the switch to keep dust and things from coming in it. And it'll just go in here like this. So what we have to do is we have to take it apart, and then we have to desolder the switch that's in there, and then we have to solder this in place. We'll have to take a good look at this, see how it goes, and go from there. To start off the disassembly, we flipped over the console and we're removing all the screws from the back so that we can flip it over and separate the housing. Now that we have our screws removed, we flip the housing back over and separate the upper plastic piece of the housing from the lower. I was having trouble trying to separate the upper and lower housing pieces by hand, so I used a small plastic pry bar to separate the two. Now that we're inside the console, I needed to disconnect the RF coaxial cable from the board. I tried to do this with my hands, but there wasn't enough room to get my fingers on the connector. I used a pair of pliers to twist the cable a little and break the connector free. Then I was able to completely disconnect the cable. Alright everyone, so you can see we've got this apart. Here's the switch that's broken. It probably still works, I don't know, I haven't tested it yet, but we're going to desolder everything and then solder the new switch in. What I had initially thought about doing, here's the original switch that's broken, it came with the console. I thought about drilling this out and then drilling this and using a needle bearing to slide down inside, glue it, put it in here, the same thing, maybe using some 2-part plastic epoxy and trying to get it to stay in place. My only concern was, well, couple one is I would need to get this pretty straight, because if it's turned too much one way or the other, whenever you're switching, it may interfere with the plastic housing and not switch all the way. Also, I don't know how long that would, or how well that would hold up over time. So I thought it'd be better if we just try to desolder this thing. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to use our soldering iron. I bought this kit right here off of Amazon a while back. It's the X-Tronic 3060 XTS. It's probably not the greatest soldering iron in the world, but it works pretty good. I haven't had any issues with it. I don't solder that often, so no problem there. I'll put a link to it in the description in case somebody would be interested in using it. But I like it. It's kind of a kit. It comes with everything. I got this little plunger tool here that's used to desolder. And basically what happens is you melt the old solder and you have this ready. So as soon as it melts, when it's armed, you put this down. Now it's in the armed position. You'll hold this right above the melted solder and then you push this button and the suction will just simply pull the old solder out. Works pretty slick. I've used it a couple times to replace the battery and some parts on the Sega Dreamcast that we have. And I also like this because it comes with these little arms. If you're working on small parts, you can hold them in place while you're soldering. And it's got this little spool here for the solder itself. So it's a pretty convenient little system. And I recommend it if you want a decent soldering iron without spending a ton of money. So we'll quit talking and I'll see if I can zoom in here and we can start desoldering this thing, or at least attempt to. So as you can see from the video, we heat up the solder on each pin until it melts, and then we use the pump. We keep going back and forth on each pin to do that, to try to get as much of the solder removed as possible so that it will be easier to remove the switch. You can see in this close-up how much solder can be removed with each pump. Although this is a lot of solder, it still takes a while to remove all the solder from each pin. Okay, now we've got the majority of the solder off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to heat up each little spot and I'm going to raise up the metal prong to make sure it's vertical as can be. And then once we get all these straight, we'll heat them up and start prying it from the other side to try and pull it out. There we have it. So we've gotten them pretty vertical. I ended up using some just small wire cutters to grab a hold of it. Because of how small the tip is, it was easier. So what we're going to do, here's our switch. I'm going to put this little screwdriver in here and I'm just going to barely pry on it while I heat up the other side to try to get it to come loose. Okay, so if you can see these, we're getting our switch pretty loose. So it's getting close to ready to come out. I ended up having to take a little bit more solder off. There was still some around the joints to try to get it off. So I'm just going to take my little wire cutters here and I'm going to start moving these back and forth a little bit and pushing them down. That way if there still is a connection with a little bit of solder, hopefully this will break it.
20 years later.
Okay guys, I finally got it out. Here's the original one. Or at least as far as we know, it's the original one. Here's the board. I kept getting hung up on this pin here for whatever reason. It's like I just couldn't get it to go through, but with enough persistence, heating it up and wiggling it, I was able to get it out. You can see this is all the solder that we removed with this little suction tool. So I highly recommend these if you're going to do soldering. It just makes it so much easier. Alright, now what we're going to do is we're going to insert our switch and solder it. After that, we'll clean everything up and put it together and go from there. Now what we're going to do before we solder these in, you can see we've got our pins sticking out here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bend them outwards. So these will be bent this way, these three will be bent that way, just to hold it in place and make it easier for us and to prevent it from coming out. I'm just taking my flathead screwdriver, you don't need much pressure, pushing it down and then bending it. And there we go.
Now we are soldering the switch to the board. If you notice, I'm holding the soldering iron on the pin for a moment to heat it up to allow the solder to stick better. I then apply solder to the soldering iron to fill the gap in the board and cover the pin.
Alright you guys, we got the switch soldered in. Works good, looks good, everything we could hope for. We're going to clean this off a little bit and then clean the case and start putting everything back together.
While we had it apart, we took a look over everything and it didn't appear that it had ever been cleaned. So we figured we'd take the opportunity to give it a cleaning before we put it back together. We cleaned the lower half of the case using alcohol and a toothbrush, and then doing a final wipe down with alcohol and a paper towel. We cleaned the top half of the case the same way as we did with the lower half. However, the top half had a lot of brown grease that required a lot of scrubbing to remove, and the ridges across the top were full of dust and dirt. Off screen, I used an air compressor to blow off as much dust as I could, but it still took a while to get it clean.
Alright you guys, so we got the housing pretty clean. Right now what we're going to do before we put this back into the housing, we're going to take a Scotch-Brite pad and we're just going to go around these metal switches to clean them up here. If we do it when it's back in the console, then any kind of dust or anything that comes off of these is going to get right on the console that we just cleaned. So we're going to go ahead and take care of it now. And all I'm going to do is just wrap it around and then just slightly twist on it. These are aluminum, I believe, but they get like some oxidation buildup on them that it's good to clean off. Alright, we got our switches pretty cleaned up. Now we're going to start to reassemble this.
The assembly is pretty straightforward and easier than most consoles. All screws are accessible on the bottom of the lower housing. The only thing I don't like is the way the RF coaxial cable runs through the housing and connects to the board. I think it would have been better if they would have connected it to a plug-in on the housing.
Alright guys, so we got everything back together and got it cleaned down pretty good with alcohol. If you can notice, there's a lot of light areas in the plastic. And what we're going to do to make this thing shine up and look nice is we're going to use the Chemical Guys tire and trim gel. We've used this on all of our other consoles. This is, I think it's around $15 for this 16-ounce bottle here. And I've used it a lot, and you can see that we've still got a ton in here. So I think this is a really great value for what it cost. I'll put a link in the description for this if you need it. And we'll put it on here.
You'll notice how light some of the plastic was. After I cleaned all of the grease that was built up on the console from not being cleaned for many years, it left the plastic looking old and dried out. I applied a thick coat of the tire and trim gel to the plastic and kept rubbing it in to try and saturate the plastic as much as possible. Due to all the cracks and crevices in the console, it took a while to complete this process.
So one thing to take into consideration here, guys, this stuff works really well. But as I mentioned before, I haven't used that much of it because a little bit goes a long way. And if you put a lot on the product or whatever you're applying this to, the console, trim, whatever, it will make it oily. So what I do is I saturate the plastic pretty good with this first, and then I'll come over it with another microfiber cloth that's clean and dry, and then do a good rub down with the dry cloth. And that'll just get any kind of residue that's left that may make it kind of slick off of the console, but yet still allow it to be nice and shiny looking. Well, there you have it, guys. We've repaired our on-off switch. We cleaned it with alcohol, and then we polished it up with the Chemical Guys tire and trim gel. The finished product, you can judge for yourself, but it looks very nice. This thing hadn't been cleaned in who knows how long, but it was pretty nasty. Now we're going to go test this out and see how we come out. Alright, so we have successfully switched out the power switch in this. As you've seen in the video, everything's working as it should. We were able to disassemble the console, clean it up, polish it up, make it look better than it's looked in who knows how long. And the most important part is we were able to switch this out and get everything to function correctly. Until next time, please like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you soon.